She was 21, exiled, alone. The royal court of Alexandria had turned on her. Her brother, barely a teenager, had seized the throne. His advisors branded her too ambitious, too visible, too dangerous. And just like that, Cleopatra was erased. No army, no ally, no warning. They thought they had ended her story. But exile isn't always disappearance. For some, it's preparation. While the court celebrated her absence, Cleopatra moved in silence. She left the palace, but not her plan. She didn't mourn her loss of power. She studied it, watched from the margins, waited for the moment when silence could become spectacle. This was not the end of her reign. This was the rehearsal. Because Cleopatra didn't return with a battalion or a rebellion. She returned in linen, rolled inside a rug, carried past guards, delivered to the very man who could change everything, Julius Caesar. She didn't come begging. She came with theater. And when that rug unfurled and she stood before Rome's most powerful man, the course of history bent in her direction. This is not a story about seduction. This is a story about strategy, about how a woman turned political invisibility into imperial command, about how exile became empire. Chapter 1. Out of the palace into the desert. When Cleopatra lost her throne, she didn't lose her mind. She lost her access. Stripped of titles, of voice, of platform, she was exiled from the palace in 48 BCE. Her brother, Ptolemy X, backed by male advisors hungry for control, declared her unfit to rule. Her name was removed from official records. Her allies vanished. Her coins were melted down. She became a whisper in the city she once led. So she disappeared. Not to surrender, but to strategize. She crossed into the desert, beyond Alexandria's reach. The sun was brutal, the landscape unforgiving. But Cleopatra knew Egypt. She knew its tribes, its merchants, its loyalties. While her enemies believed she was finished, she was gathering support, quietly. She wasn't raising an army. She was raising the stakes. She studied Rome's next move, because Rome always had a next move, and that move arrived in the form of Julius Caesar, newly docked in Alexandria after chasing his rival Pompey. Caesar came seeking dominance. Cleopatra saw opportunity. She didn't write a letter. She didn't request an audience. She planned a moment Caesar would never forget. With only a handful of loyal followers, she arranged to be smuggled into the royal palace. Her body wrapped tightly in linen, concealed inside a rolled rug. Not an assassin, not a prisoner, a queen re-entering her game. The risk was enormous. If caught, she could be killed. If dismissed, ignored. But Cleopatra didn't calculate for safety. She calculated for memory. She knew this moment had to be unforgettable, not just for Caesar, for Egypt, for history. And that night, when servants laid that rug before Caesar and unrolled it at his feet, Cleopatra emerged, not broken, not begging, but ready. Chapter 2. She didn't beg. She performed strategy. Julius Caesar had seen everything. Wars, betrayals, rulers clawing for influence. But he had never seen a queen emerge from a rug. When Cleopatra stood before him, she didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She simply existed, dignified, composed, and fully in control of her entrance. She knew Caesar admired boldness. Rome rewarded spectacle. This was not a flirtation. It was a calculated shock. What she offered him was not romance, it was partnership. Egypt was Rome's grain basket. Whoever ruled it controlled food, trade, and access to the east. Cleopatra understood leverage, and she knew Caesar didn't need a wife. He needed an ally. In private talks, she laid out her vision, a stable Egypt under her rule, aligned with Roman interests. She offered clarity, not chaos, intelligence, not indulgence. Caesar listened, and he agreed. He ordered her reinstated as queen, triggering outrage from Ptolemy XIII's forces. War broke out in Alexandria. For months, Caesar and Cleopatra's loyalists fought street by street. Fires burned the city. At one point, parts of the Great Library were destroyed. But in the end, Ptolemy XIII was defeated. His body was found in the Nile. Cleopatra returned to the throne. Her younger brother Ptolemy XIV was installed beside her as co-ruler, but in name only. She held the power. And soon after, she gave birth to a son, Caesarion. Though Rome would never formally recognize him, Cleopatra made her point clear. Her line continued. She had gone from exile to ruler of the most valuable kingdom in the Mediterranean, not by seduction, by precision. And she never forgot the lesson. When you control the story, you shape the outcome. Chapter 3. The Queen returns on her own terms. Caesar was gone, but Cleopatra wasn't finished. With her son Caesarion now co-ruler, Cleopatra's next move wasn't inward, it was toward Rome again. A new power struggle had begun. Rome had fractured into factions. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, and Mark Antony, his top general, were now rivals for control. Cleopatra watched. She waited. Then, in 41 BCE, Mark Antony summoned her to Tarsus to answer for Egypt's loyalty. She didn't send diplomats. She didn't go quietly. She arrived on a golden barge, sails of purple silk, incense in the air. Musicians, servants, fine robes. She sailed like a goddess. Antony expected tribute. Instead, he found theater. She didn't apologize. She hosted him, feasted him, negotiated directly. Within days, they were allies and lovers. Cleopatra secured protection for Egypt. Antony secured wealth and political clout. Together, they became a force Rome couldn't ignore. She bore him 3 children. She elevated Caesarion. She funded his campaigns. But their alliance triggered a crisis. Octavian painted Cleopatra as the foreign temptress controlling Antony. He framed it as Rome versus Egypt, civilization versus corruption. And it worked. By 31 BCE, war broke. At the Battle of Actium, Antony and Cleopatra's forces were defeated at sea. They fled to Egypt. Within a year, Roman troops approached Alexandria. They knew what was coming. And yet, Cleopatra did not surrender. Chapter 4. The bigger play, Rome, rivalry, reinvention. Caesar was gone. But Cleopatra wasn't finished. With her son Caesarion now co-ruler, Cleopatra's next move wasn't inward, it was toward Rome again. A new power struggle had begun. Rome had fractured into factions. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, and Mark Antony, his top general, were now rivals for control. Cleopatra watched. She waited. Then, in 41 BCE, Mark Antony summoned her to Tarsus to answer for Egypt's loyalty. She didn't send diplomats. She didn't go quietly. She arrived on a golden barge, sails of purple silk, incense in the air. Musicians, servants, fine robes. She sailed like a goddess. Antony expected tribute. Instead, he found theater. She didn't apologize. She hosted him, feasted him, negotiated directly. Within days, they were allies and lovers. Cleopatra secured protection for Egypt. Antony secured wealth and political clout. Together, they became a force Rome couldn't ignore. She bore him 3 children. She elevated Caesarion. She funded his campaigns. But their alliance triggered a crisis. Octavian painted Cleopatra as the foreign temptress controlling Antony. He framed it as Rome versus Egypt, civilization versus corruption. And it worked. By 31 BCE, war broke. At the Battle of Actium, Antony and Cleopatra's forces were defeated at sea. They fled to Egypt. Within a year, Roman troops approached Alexandria. They knew what was coming. And yet, Cleopatra did not surrender. Chapter 5. the final move. Rome planned to parade Cleopatra through its streets. A captive queen, bound in chains, marched as a symbol of imperial dominance. She refused. Cleopatra had studied empire. She had watched kings rise and fall, gods made and broken by narrative. She understood one final truth. Even in defeat, there is power in the ending. She met with Octavian, calm, poised, but behind the facade, she was preparing. She secured her treasures, sent final messages, ensured her children's safety. And then, in a private chamber, with only her most trusted women present, Cleopatra took her life. The method remains debated. Was it a snakebite, poison, or a blade? No one knows for certain. What matters is that it was her decision. She denied Rome their spectacle. She exited the world on her own terms. Cleopatra died as she lived, not quietly, not as a pawn, but as the author of her own legacy. The strategy was never just the rug. The rug wasn't magic. It was movement. When Cleopatra rolled herself into linen and entered Caesar's palace, she wasn't performing weakness. She was displaying will. She had no army, no allies, but she had one thing left, her mind. And with it, she staged a return that rewrote her fate. That moment was not the climax. It was the blueprint. Cleopatra's strategy wasn't seduction. It was narrative control. She knew what men feared most: a woman who didn't need their permission, a woman who re-entered rooms they had locked behind her, a woman who refused to disappear. She ruled for over 2 decades, not through luck, but through leverage. She mastered alliance, symbolism, economy, and diplomacy. She survived exile, war, betrayal, and empire. And when she could no longer rule, she ruled the ending. Her story isn't about beauty, it's about boldness. It's about what women do when they've been erased, how they return, not with noise, but with precision, not to ask, but to claim. Cleopatra's empire began in a rolled rug, but what she really unrolled was a new possibility: that strategy can be silent, that power can be embodied, that survival can look like surrender until it isn't. She was never meant to last, and yet she's unforgettable. Because the most dangerous woman is never the one who arrives loudly. It's the one who arrives wrapped in silence, then unfolds a kingdom.